After receiving a clue from a local informant, the adventurers made their way to the Jade Lion Club. Famous for its ornate interior and beautiful dancers, the adventurers are stupefied on their entrance. Noticing the arrival of the well-armed strangers, the gang members start to assemble. The glowing Jade Lion pillars begin to crackle with a magical energy. An adventurer knocks a pillar down in the commotion, shattering it into pieces, and the collective wail and pain can be heard from the gang members.
What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to the Craft Lair. I am the Crafter. This is the Lair. This week, I have 3D modeled a number of accessories to go along with the May release of the Artisan Guild Oni clan. These are all kind of like a fantasy Yakuza style of miniatures. You subscribe to their Patreon, and every month you get a number of STL files to print out at home. So I've done that. I've painted up a few of them. I didn't quite get through all of them, but you know, the effect is the same. I went ahead and 3D modeled some little like wall dividers. These actually work alongside my Dirt Cheap Dungeons wall kit, so this is going to be great. It'll fit right in with the aesthetic of those walls that I already use in my games. I also did these awesome light up pillars. They've got kind of like this lion's head, you know, Asian style to it, and it uses a modified tealight. You can flick that on. The effect is a little difficult to see out here in the bright light, but it looks really cool in lower, dimmer light. I've also 3D modeled and 3D printed some tables and chairs. Now this symbol says Oni in Japanese, which I think just means like gang, as well as some kind of Eastern style chairs. And the last thing that I am completing right now is some gongs. Maybe your player characters can throw this gong and sever somebody's head or something awesome like that. I'm going to be giving away STL files as often as possible, making build videos as often as possible, so be sure to like, subscribe, and stick around for more.
A little bit longer of a video today, but I'm so excited to share what I've been working on. I think this stuff turned out really great, and there's some cool new techniques that you might not have seen before in here, so stick around. Taking a brief look at the STL files here, we have a number of different accessories. The first being this gong. It's got some holes cut out so you can thread some rope through that and attach that cylinder gong piece to the rest of the frame. We've got these two ornate Chinese screen style walls. One has feet and one does not. Depends on if you want to use that. I scaled these to work with my Dirt Cheap Dungeons accessories. Those are like a modular set of walls that you can buy. These are the tealight columns. They can fit a modified tealight into the base. You run a wire up, and if you print with a transparent resin, you can get an interesting lighting effect coming in from the inside of these lion heads. It gives a really cool kind of magical effect. I included this little ring that you can glue to the bottom of your tealight to kind of conceal that, as well as some tables and chairs here that have the Oni clan symbol, at least that's what Google told me this was, emblazoned onto the top surface of these tables. So if you subscribe to Artisan Guilds, I highly recommend them. They give out lots of pre-supported models. I was so excited to get these and print these out. This is from the May release, so a little slow to the punch here, but I got these printed out a while ago and assembled and built out some more accessories to go along with them so I can incorporate this into my campaign. The detail on these models is truly incredible. They also include a bunch of modular different arms and weapons and attachments and things like that, so you can really customize these models. Super high detailed, really high quality prints from Artisan Guild. I couldn't be more excited about these. I wasn't sure what exactly to do with them, so my campaign was going to call for getting into some kind of thieves guild or getting into some kind of like gang hideout, and I figured there's no reason this couldn't be like an Eastern style gang, so I kind of amended my campaign to fit with these, and I couldn't be happier with the results. Taking some black spray primer and just brushing that in with my airbrush, I'm going to attempt a zenithal style highlight here. So that's where you paint mostly black and then you come in with some white primer from the direction that the light is coming from. So it gives kind of like some realistic highlights. So mostly covering these in black. I primed and did the skin tones on most of these with my airbrush. For the purposes of this video, I wasn't able to finish painting every single model. I wish I could, I'm just too slow at it. Here I am going in through with some of that zenithal highlighting, so just taking some white primer and airbrushing that in where the lighting effects would come from. This is like a wizard character, so a bright white highlight from his palm where that fireball is coming from. Assembling out all my 3D pieces here, just making sure I have everything accounted for. I'm building 3 tables, 6 columns and about 8 of these screen doors. Going through and wearing a mask, sanding down some of these resin support marks so I can glue on the bases to the tables, and then getting ready to start the soldering process for the light up columns here. I'm using a 22 AWG speaker wire. This wire is connected together and works great. I got this little soldering iron off of Amazon for 10 bucks, and I'll put links to that stuff in the description as well. So the LEDs have a positive and a negative terminal. The longer end is going to be the positive terminal, which I'm hooking up to the red wire, and you just kind of want to test these on your tealight. I've covered in other videos how to disassemble the tealight. It's really easy. You just remove that screw and snip off some of the extra plastic and remove that shroud, and from there you can cut off the LED and solder that in there. Now the LEDs themselves from these tealights are what flickers. I had assumed in one of my previous builds that the electronics themselves would be what causes the column to flicker. That was not the case. The LEDs themselves had the flickering mechanism inside of them. So at first I tried an orange LED for these, and I wasn't really quite happy with that. I went through and primed them out just to see how it looked, but I'm going to go back and use a green LED that can go inside of these columns. Now for the bases of the tables, I wanted something that I could affix all these tables to. I really don't want to have to set up tons of individual chairs for my games. I'm not a catering company. I'm trying to run a DM game here, and I don't really mind if I glue those tables down. So just taking some foam core, giving it an organic shape that's approximately the size of the table, beveling the edges down, and now taking some DAS air drying clay and covering up the base. I'm also using a 3D printed texture roller for that, so I can get some cool cobblestones and gluing that onto the foam core base. From there you can trim off the excess and make the rest of the clay coverings for your other bases. So I wasn't sure what to do with this. Honestly, I'm not a great mini painter. I'm okay at it. If you want to follow really talented mini painters, I recommend looking into people like Miniac or Squidmar Miniatures or Goobertown Hobbies. Those guys are all fantastic and on a totally different level. I included some of the painting here just so I could show off some of the Artisan Guild prints, but I'm going in with some red, and this will be kind of like the shadows of the skin tone, so I was just trying to be cognizant of where I started spraying those colors in. So since these were part of the shadows, generally I would shade from the opposite direction of that white highlight I had put on. I wanted the red kind of ligaments of the skin tones to show through there. Again, just going through lots of models here, so I want the fleshy bits to be red at generally their darkest, and then going in and just trying to work those values lighter and lighter onto the skin as realistically as possible based on the lighting that I had kind of established with that zenithal highlight initially. As well as some Kislev flesh, and again, just working those values lighter and lighter from the direction of the lighting, trying my best to get some natural looking shadows across the skin tones here. Now honestly, this process of doing the skin tones did take quite a while, so from there I moved on and just did the 6 modular grunts and completed those for the rest of this video. Now that our bases for the tables have dried, I'm going through and just kind of cleaning up some of the clay edges on that and brushing in some Mod Podge to seal all of that together and make it nice and durable. I made it a little bit further on the painting process with some of the Oni grunts. I've gone through and added some details to their cloaks and to their shoulder armor. From here, again, I just really wasn't liking how the orange light was coming through. Even though you get the nice flickering effect, I didn't think it was really worth using orange when I was going to be naming this the Jade Lion Club. It didn't really make sense to put that much emphasis on the orange color. So I decided to stick with a green LED, and I'm actually placing that LED kind of into the base of the tealight itself, and that helps hold it there while I solder it all together. And super easy wiring, you just solder on your LED, run it straight up the middle, and solder that back down onto the tealight electronics base itself. From there, I wanted to make sure that the transparent bit of the lion statue would remain transparent, so I covered that with some blue painter's tape. And went through with my hot glue gun and secured all of the electronics into the base themselves. Going through with my airbrush and brushing in some primer. I wanted to use an airbrush instead of spray paint for this. On the first one that I did, that spray paint was just way too opaque, and I wanted to keep some of the transparent aspects of the clear green resin that I had. So I was just gently working up those values, and I tried to leave it slightly translucent, so some of the transparency of the resin would still shine through. Again, just going through and priming everything. It was at this stage that I wanted to build an additional piece for this. I've been saving this piece of styrofoam forever. It came with an old grill, I think, that we bought, and when I originally saw this, I just knew that I could use this as some kind of stage or throne room, or it could really be just kind of any modular piece. It could be like the king's court, it could be part of a building, really anything. So to stiffen up that kind of crappy styrofoam, I went through with some PVA glue and just brushed that over everything. And after that dried, that kind of stiffened up pretty good. I'm also using some DAS air drying clay here, and I'm going to be applying some more of that rolled texture, cobblestone texture to this. And this will just help give it a more realistic look than using that styrofoam texture that is very noticeable. From there, we can take those clay pieces and just kind of wrap them around and cut where necessary. This worked out pretty well. It wasn't perfect, honestly, but I wasn't really trying to spend too much time on this bit. This was just kind of like an additional accessory that I wanted to create, and I felt like I needed a stage for some of these Oni dancers. Just kind of truing that up as best as I can. You don't want to overwork the clay. From there, I start brushing in some more green colors onto pretty much all of these jade accessories, just brightening those up. Again, not going too heavy-handed with it. I want some of that transparency to be subtly in there. So just really thin layers of green paint on these. Same thing with the tealight columns. Just going in and brushing that in. I very, very, very gently brushed some greens over that transparent top as well. It was still totally transparent, but it just kind of helped mute the differences in greens. And I think later on in the build, I definitely did a good job kind of aligning those two colors so it didn't look so jarring from the clear top to the more opaque bottom. From there, I'm brushing in some green onto these bases. Again, I want this to be like a really ornate kind of club, so I figured maybe the floor is made of some kind of like alabaster or jade stone, so I kept those kind of like a dark green. And on this platform, I wanted this to be, again, kind of modular, so I'm creating like a wood platform that can sit into this stage thing I've created. And maybe if you could remove this, it could become like a arena or like a pit of spikes or something like that. There's lots of different things you could make with this piece of styrofoam, which is why I was so excited to save it for probably like 5-6 months, honestly. From there, just cutting up some craft sticks and making them look irregular by cutting them into smaller pieces and whittling those down with my X-Acto knife. After that, we can cover everything in a coat of black Mod Podge. From there, brush in some brown paint, as well as some coats of gray paint. And I went through, and this looks kind of ridiculous now, but it does get a little bit better. This red was probably a little heavy-handed, but I wanted some of these cobblestones to look like they had come from different places or something like that. I didn't want this to look like necessarily the rest of the Oni club because I was imagining I was going to use this quite a bit, so I went with a more neutral gray palette. For the details of the jade, this turned out really great, and I was so happy I tried this. I took my detail brush and some very bright, I think this is Moot Green from Citadel, and I just created some kind of like spider webbing effects on all of the different jade pieces, and we'll revisit that a little bit later. After that, I used some ground up chalk to create some weathering pigment. From there, I'm going back in with my airbrush and using a brighter green and just very gently brushing in some softness around those little spider webby green lines, and that just helps give it a more natural and less jarring kind of effect. It's not entirely necessary if you don't have an airbrush, but this definitely did help add to the effect of this kind of like old jade with these veins of different colors running throughout it. So you can kind of see the difference there between the kind of sharp original paint from the Moot Green and how it gets kind of softened up once I retrace those lines with my airbrush. From there, I went through and applied a coat of Beltan green ink to nearly everything, and this helped just kind of unify the entire piece. As you can see now, the top doesn't look so differently colored than the rest of the column. I think that turned out really great, and it was still transparent enough for the light of the LED to shine through. For the tables, I'm just going through and using some wood colors and working those values. A couple coats of some different browns. I think I used some yellow ink on this, as well as some Agrax Earthshade brown ink, and just kind of work those values up. For the little symbol on top, I wanted that to be like a gold leaf, perhaps, or some kind of gold on there. And I started with a brown coat of paint and then used the gold on top, and that provided a really great base coat for that. I then used some of the Citadel nickel oxide to give that kind of rusted, tarnished copper effect on that, and I thought that turned out really, really great. I then went through with some glue and applied that to the bottoms of the table, and as well as went in and dry brushed the chairs and got those ready. I sprayed down some varnish on the bases and covered up the tops just because I didn't want to lose that kind of glossy effect, and then used some super glue to glue on all of the individual chairs. Going through and giving everything a pretty rough dry brush of some lighter tones just kind of helps bring out some of the details on all the different edges. A couple of these columns I had actually broken when I removed from the printer, and I went through with some Liquitex heavy gloss gel to kind of shore up those gaps, and that looked fine. However, I decided to go in at the last minute and add some of this Liquitex gel to the very tops of the tables to give some really high gloss effect to this. Honestly, it didn't really turn out great. As much as I tried to get the brush strokes as clean as possible and as even as possible, it really just kind of looked like there was something painted onto the top of the tables. It's not bad, I'm not going to restart because of it, but I would probably skip using the gloss gel on the tables if I were to build these again. Again, going through and dry brushing in some more edge details onto the little stage thing. I don't know exactly what to call this thing, but we'll call it a stage. As well as dry brushing in some more details onto the wooden boards of the platform. From there, I like to use rubber cement to add a black construction paper base. This just kind of makes it look a little more professional across the board. So what you do is you apply this, let it dry, apply it to the other side of whatever you're gluing, let that dry, and once you stick those together, it forms a very strong bond. From there, you can just trim those out with an X-Acto blade, and I believe off camera we'll give everything a coat of varnish just to protect everything and seal it all down. Lastly, I decided to make a gong at the very last minute. I just thought there could be some hilarious role-playing moments where somebody could take one of these things and frisbee it across the room and injure somebody or something like that. I started with a coat of brown as a base coat and then went over with some gold paint and then painted it brown the rest of the frame. Lastly, I went through with some nickel oxide here again and just kind of added in some tarnishing to the gong itself. I got some really thin hemp twine off of Amazon. I think I paid $3 for several hundred feet. It's more than I could ever use. And I used that to create the little loops and run those through the frame of the gong and create a kind of realistic little gong there. I decided to add some super glue to the knots just to make sure those don't come out. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, be sure to subscribe. I'm going to be giving away STL files as often as possible, putting up build videos as often as possible. Your support and your subscriptions really keep me motivated to keep on making videos and putting more content out there. I am the Crafter, this is the Lair, and we'll see you in the next one.